It all came to a head on a humid Wednesday morning when a clipboard-wielding HOA rep and two security guards marched up to my porch. "You're in violation again." But here's what they didn't know. I'd been documenting everything. Every absurd notice, every passive-aggressive letter, every whispered neighbor complaint. And I wasn't just some suburban homeowner. They were about to find out I had a background in community law. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about power. And I wasn't going down without a fight. Maplewood Gardens sounded like paradise. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, birdsong engineered by the HOA's weekly pest control. When I moved in, I thought I'd found my peaceful sanctuary, a single mom's fresh start, just trying to grow something beautiful. So I planted petunias, pink, violet, and a streak of sunny yellow. That's when it started. First, it was a note, no signature. Then sideways glances from Mr. Denton across the street, and silence where smiles used to be. Something was off. The HOA's rules were vague, but the message from the community was clear. Don't stand out. I hadn't just planted flowers. I'd disrupted the order. Her name was Clarissa Eames, HOA president for 7 years running. I met her at the community bake sale, smile tight as a drum, pearls so stiff they could cut glass. "Lovely display," she said, eyeing my booth. "Shame about the unauthorized floral colors." That was my introduction. Clarissa didn't ask questions. She issued commands. Behind her, the board nodded. I felt the chill. This wasn't neighborly concern. It was control wrapped in civility. And under that politeness, a warning. This community isn't yours. Not yet. It began subtly. My lawn got flagged for excess growth 0.5 inches over regulation. A neighbor apologized that I had to report it. Clarissa checks. Then came the emails. Failure to adhere to community uniformity. I attended a meeting. Asked about the flower clause. Clarissa's smile widened. Well, we all know what aesthetic consistency means. I knew what this was. Not about flowers. About obedience. So I trimmed the lawn and added a new pot of lilies. Just to see. 3 fines in 2 weeks. Then came the photo someone had snapped of my porch from a sidewalk. Another anonymous complaint. One morning, I found a flyer taped to my door, "Why Rules Matter." Clarissa spoke at the next meeting. Some residents think personal expression overrides collective harmony. I didn't speak, but I recorded. I made copies. I read the bylaws. And I started gathering stories. Whispers turned to nods. Turns out I wasn't the only one tired of Clarissa's crusade. I noticed a pattern. Clarissa targeted a nonconformer, a family with a colorful door, and a retired veteran with handmade birdhouses. She quoted policy but never cited sources. I began compiling cases. Each fine, each comment, cross-referenced against the actual HOA guidelines. Turns out, Clarissa was bluffing, but no one had ever challenged her. Until now. A certified letter arrived, final warning. Legal action pending. Claim, repeated and willful violation of neighborhood aesthetic. I submitted a formal dispute. Clarissa responded with a cease and desist. That same week, another resident, Mrs. Lynn, had her compost bin confiscated. They said it invited rodents. I documented everything. Clarissa was weaponizing the system, but I had patience and evidence. The neighborhood began to buzz. Some stood with Clarice. She keeps things clean. Others started knocking on my door. I got fined for painting my mailbox without approval. I heard what you're doing. Thank you. Tensions rose at board meetings. One resident stormed out. A whisper. She can't keep hiding behind those rules. Lines were being drawn. It was almost time. Clarissa escalated. A full board meeting was called. She introduced a new clause for retroactive landscaping compliance. It passed 3-2. Effective immediately. I received a fine of $750. Clarissa smiled. Let this be a reminder. But what she didn't know, I contacted a housing rights attorney, and we had the receipts. The showdown was set. Open community hearing, July 3rd. Everyone was invited. The clubhouse was packed. Residents filled every seat. Clarissa opened confidently. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to standards. I stood, calm, focused. I'd like to speak. The board hesitated. I laid down the binder, time-stamped photos, emails, and recorded conversations. Clarissa froze. I wasn't alone anymore. Voices murmured, "Let her speak." I read directly from the HOA bylaws that floral decoration is not restricted unless it obstructs pathways. Mine didn't. I listed the selective enforcement, named names, dates. Clarissa's language was interpretive, not legal. Then I dropped the kicker. My attorney had filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority. The board's insurance was at risk. Gasps. Clarissa's hands trembled. Someone from the back yelled, "Resign." The board motioned to suspend fines immediately. Clarissa objected only to be overruled. That night, residents gathered on my porch. Some brought cookies. One brought a shovel. "We thought you might want to expand the garden." Clarissa retreated. For now. But the power had shifted. Clarissa stepped down a week later. A community task force was formed. Bylaws were reviewed with legal counsel. New leadership was elected. The garden stayed. So did the birdhouses. So did the compost bins. I didn't gloat, but I stood a little taller. Neighbors who once ignored me now waved. Mrs. Lynn started a seed exchange. Mr. Denton apologized, then offered to help paint flower boxes. I learned something. Standing your ground doesn't always make you enemies. Sometimes it creates allies. The HOA policy changed. New residents were welcomed with the freedom to personalize. Our community newsletter now features a Garden of the Month. My story spread, picked up by a local blog, then a regional paper. Turns out, people wanted to hear about the little guy pushing back. And the flowers? Still blooming. Just like us. They say the devil is in the details. In Maplewood Gardens, the devil wore a silk scarf and carried a measuring tape. The first official notice came 3 days after the bake sale. Folded into a manila envelope, taped to my mailbox like a passive-aggressive ransom note. Violation: non-regulation foliage border 2.5 inches outside designated bed line. Seriously, I pulled out a ruler. 2.5 inches. My kid spills more milk than that when she breathes near a cereal box. So I trimmed it back, muttering under my breath, but I knew this wasn't about mulch. It was a test. The next week, another notice. This time for a wind chime. Unauthorized auditory ornamentation exceeding acceptable decibel limits. I laughed out loud. My wind chime was quieter than Clarissa's heels, clacking across the pavement during her HOA patrols. But I didn't argue. Not yet. Then a neighbor, sweet old Mr. Renner, gave me a heads up that Clarissa flagged your garden to the board privately. She thinks it's too expressive. Too expressive? It was a flower bed, not a protest sign. But the message was clear. I wasn't just a new homeowner. I was a disruption. I went to the next HOA meeting, sat in the back like an observer in a courtroom drama. Clarissa, of course, presided like a Supreme Court justice, smug in her power. When I raised my hand to ask about the landscaping rules, her smile was pure theater. "It's all in the handbook," she purred. "A good neighbor reads the rules." Everyone chuckled. And just like that, I was cast, the rule breaker, the outsider. They wanted compliance. I wanted clarity. And those two things were not the same. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, emails, even voice memos. I wasn't paranoid. I was methodical. Because I knew what this was. A campaign. Clarissa wasn't trying to keep the neighborhood tidy. She was flexing her authority like a sword in a sheath, slicing quietly but deliberately. At night, I'd sit by my window and watch her take her evening stroll, clipboard in hand, that smug little walk like she owned every blade of grass. And then she made it personal. A letter arrived. No HOA letterhead, just a handwritten note. "You're bringing down the neighborhood. We all notice." No signature, but the handwriting matched the passive-aggressive bake sale comment card someone left on my banana bread. "Too spicy for a family event." Spicy. Banana bread. I was tired of waiting, so I leaned in. I started printing out sections of the bylaws, highlighted phrases, created a binder. I knocked on a few doors. Quiet chats. "Hey, have you ever had any issues with Clarissa?" At first, hesitation. She fined me for a kid's drawing in the window. She told my daughter her hair color wasn't community appropriate. She made me cry over a bird feeder. I wasn't alone. But I was the first to push back. Here's where everything clicked. It was never random. Clarissa targeted what she called visual disruptors. Anything she felt broke the unspoken suburban monotony, she'd build her identity around. Bright paint, unusual flowers, garden gnomes with personalities. The HOA rules were vague enough to let her run wild, but specific enough to scare people into submission. She wielded ambiguity like a scalpel, and she always used fear as anesthesia. But I had something she didn't have receipts for, and I was connecting the dots. Every neighbor she targeted had one thing in common. They didn't fit her aesthetic mold. This wasn't about community. It was about control. I began organizing everything. I had timelines, testimonies, photos, a spreadsheet worthy of a courtroom drama, and I had a plan. I started working with the local legal advisor. Quietly, carefully. She told me something that made my stomach drop. If you can prove selective enforcement, you've got a strong civil case. Selective enforcement. That's the legal term for weaponized HOA rules. I just needed a few more pieces. So I played the game. Trimmed the lawn. Moved the chimes. Put on the act of compliance. And while she paraded around like the queen of Maplewood, I built my case. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was hunting. And Clarissa didn't even see it coming. She thought she was untouchable. But she'd made one mistake. She picked the wrong flower to trample. That word hit like a hammer. This wasn't just HOA noise anymore. They were throwing down the gauntlet. Attached was a list of supposed violations, typed like a criminal record. And there it was, refusal to cooperate with community harmony standards. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. Who writes that? Community harmony standards. What is this, Maplewood or North Korea? That afternoon, Clarissa strutted past my house like she was on parade, shooting me a glance that screamed, "Gotcha!" She didn't know I'd recorded the last board meeting. Every smug word, every nod of the spineless board members. I'd started transcribing them, too. My legal advisor? She was stunned. This level of selective enforcement and intimidation? You've got enough for a full case. Possibly damages. But I wasn't ready to sue. Not yet. Because Clarissa had built a paper fortress of fear. And I was going to tear it down. Brick by brick. In public. Clarissa's grip on the neighborhood started to crack. And it started with a lawn ornament. It was Mr. Ramirez, a retired vet who'd lived in Maplewood for 18 years, who lit the first match. He put up an American flag and a small hand-painted gnome. Clarissa lost her mind. Residents murmured. Whispers on sidewalks. Side eyes at mailboxes. A Facebook group popped up overnight. Maplewood Neighbors for Sanity. 30 members. Then 50. Then 100. Screenshots of violations. Fines. Photos of Clarissa patrolling like a dictator with a clipboard. And my inbox. Flooded. I was fined for pink flamingos. She told my son to remove his sidewalk chalk. She knocked on my door and lectured me about fence symmetry. The tide was turning. One morning, I opened my door to find Mrs. Lynn, tears in her eyes. She made me tear out my herb garden. Said it looked like clutter. Mrs. Lynn had lived here longer than Clarissa. She used to run the community cookouts. Now she was too scared to plant basil. I hugged her, told her, we're done being quiet. At the next HOA meeting, we didn't sit in the back. We sat in the front row. And when Clarissa tried to brush us off, we didn't raise our hands. We stood, spoke, and for the first time, her voice shook. The Queen of Maplewood was losing her crown. And she knew it. Clarissa's final power move came wrapped in bureaucracy and coated in smugness. She called an emergency board session. Word spread fast. New rule proposal. Landscape Standardization Act. It sounded official. It sounded harmless. It was neither. Buried in the fine print, all previously planted flora must conform to HOA-approved colors within 10 days. Noncompliancy will result in property lien procedures. A lien. In my house. Because of flowers. She wanted a war. She had it. The meeting room was packed. People are standing, crowding the windows. Some with garden gloves still on. Others are holding photos of their violations. Clarissa stood at the front like she was announcing a new tax code. This measure is to preserve our community's image, she said, voice syrupy sweet. It's what's best for all of us. And then the vote. 3-2. Passed. One board member walked out in disgust. Another just stared at the floor. Clarissa grinned. She thought she'd won. But while she was busy enforcing aesthetic tyranny, I'd been building an arsenal. Because I didn't just have testimonials. I had timelines. I had financial records showing she fined minority homeowners 3 times more often than others. I had the bylaws, the real ones, signed and sealed, and not one of them gave her the power to retroactively enforce cosmetic rules. And finally, I had the ace, a housing rights attorney and a formal complaint filed with the state HOA regulation board. This wasn't a protest anymore. This was a reckoning. And the next meeting wasn't hers. It was ours. Community hearing. Open forum. July 3rd. Every resident was invited. And Clarissa? She'd be center stage. The clubhouse parking lot was already full. SUVs parked on lawns, bikes thrown onto curbs, and someone even chained a moped to a stop sign. Inside, the air was thick with tension and sweat. Plastic chairs scraped the tile. Whispered side conversations buzzed louder than the AC. The crowd had tripled since the last meeting. Clarissa sat at the front of the room, flanked by 2 loyal board members like bodyguards. Her pearl necklace sat tighter than usual. Her smile was mechanical. She flipped through her binder, page corners snapping under pressure. I stepped in, carrying my binder, twice the size of hers, bursting with documents, photos, printed emails, and one final card she never saw coming. The moment I entered, silence rippled. Eyes followed me to the podium. The HOA president tapped the mic, trying to reclaim the room. Before we begin, she announced, I'd like to remind everyone that disruption will not be tolerated. This is a structured discussion. Then let's have it, I interrupted calmly. And let's make it public. She blinked. You're not on the agenda. I submitted a formal grievance last week. A murmur from a crowd. One of the board members glanced at his phone and stiffened. She did. Timestamped. It's official. Clarissa's jaw clenched. I opened the binder. Let's talk about selective enforcement. About harassment. About violations invented out of thin air. About the destruction of community trust. The room hushed like a courtroom. I have receipts, I said. Literally. And the gloves were off. I started with the fines. Slide after slide projected onto the wall behind me. Same infractions. Different punishments. Mrs. Lynn's herb garden has $150 fine. Mr. Denner's rose bush same size, same location. No citation. Clarissa tried to interject. The board has discretion. Discretion is not discrimination, I cut in. Gasps. Whispers. But no one stood to defend her. Next, I moved to dates. I flipped to a calendar showing every enforcement action Clarissa had taken in the last 6 months. I color-coded them. The pattern was nuclear. Every red and blue dot, hit with fines. Every green, untouched. Clarissa's face began to flush. Her grip on her binder whitened. And then I said, there's this. I held up a printout. The HOA's official bylaws highlighted. Section 3.2.3 No member of the HOA may impose retroactive fines without unanimous board approval and a 30-day resident notice. Her new landscaping rule? Illegal. Completely. I dropped another bomb. The Attorney General's office received this complaint 2 days ago. I projected the email confirmation. A formal investigation had been opened. Clarissa's eyes darted around the room. She looked for allies. But even her loyal board member had leaned away from her now. You've fined residents thousands for imaginary rules. You've bullied a retired veteran over a gnome. You've torn out herb gardens. You've harassed families. And you did it with a smile. But you forgot one thing. I leaned in. Paper trails don't lie. The crowd exploded in whispers and stunned mutters. Then came the moment. Clarissa stood. I will not be humiliated like this. You did that yourself. Someone called from the back. Mrs. Lynn stood, raising her voice for the first time. We trusted you, she said. And you punished us for living. Clarissa's mouth opened, but no sound came. She sat down. Hard. And just like that, the Queen of Maplewood was dethroned. The room turned electric. People stood. Applauded. Some cried. one of the board members announced, effective immediately. All pending fines are suspended. We'll convene a vote on leadership in 7 days. Clarissa didn't speak. She didn't stand. She just stared forward, as if hoping she could rewind the last 30 minutes. I stepped down from the podium. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. From relief. Mr. Ramirez gave me a slow, proud nod. You did it. Mrs. Lynn hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. You gave us back our homes. And then, like fate was finally tired of being patient, Clarissa stood up, knocked over her chair, and stormed out of the clubhouse, without a word. No clipboard. No pearls. Just fury and silence. People cheered. But I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because it wasn't over yet. I still had work to do. The next morning, someone placed a fresh pot of lilies on my porch with a note. Grow louder. Your neighbors. By noon, my inbox had messages from 5 other HOAs asking how we'd done it. By evening, a local news crew stood on my lawn. The headline read, Suburban Showdown. Woman defeats HOA tyranny with flowers and facts. That night, Clarissa tried one last move and sent a cease and desist letter through her lawyer claiming defamation. We sent back copies of 43 documented violations, 27 neighbor statements, and a counterclaim for emotional distress. We never heard from her again, and in her absence, Maplewood finally exhaled. The board reconvened exactly 7 days after the confrontation. No banners, no donuts, just a folding table, 3 fresh resignations, and an agenda that started with motion to remove Clarissa Eames from all HOA roles effective immediately. The vote was unanimous. Clarissa didn't show. Her front yard, once the neighborhood's example of perfection, was now overgrown, unwatered, and silent. No more lawn checklists. No more newsletters typed in passive-aggressive Comic Sans. No more 7 a.m. patrols. But the fallout didn't end with her exit. The neighborhood finally started looking alive again. The HOA bylaws, rewritten, in plain English, reviewed by a real housing attorney this time. No more aesthetic harmony clauses. No more vague jargon that gave petty tyrants a badge and a battalion. Instead, new rules were passed. A community that once shivered at every fine now stood taller with each day. Homes began reflecting the people inside them. Gnomes returned. Wind chimes rang. Sidewalk chalk murals bloomed like spring. And then came the real shift. Monthly open meetings, with live streams for anyone who couldn't attend. Rotating leadership to prevent power consolidation. And most shocking of all, people started volunteering for the board. Victory tastes strange when you've spent months fighting just to breathe. It took me a while to relax, to trust it wasn't all going to be yanked back, that some new rule wouldn't sneak in and ruin everything. But then something changed. People started stopping by not to complain, but to connect. Mr. Denton, the guy who once glared at my begonias like they'd insulted his ancestry, dropped off paint samples for flower boxes. Thought you might like these, he mumbled. Mrs. Lynn began hosting Sunday teas. With her herbs, the Ramirez kids started a community compost. Their dad built benches. The HOA transformed from a hall of judgment into a living room. And me, I stopped seeing my garden as a battleground. It became a sanctuary again. One afternoon, I watched my daughter run through the sprinkler, laughing, sunflower seeds in her hair. That same night, she handed me a drawing she'd made. It was our porch, overflowing with color, and 3 bold words scrawled in crayon. That hit harder than anything Clarissa ever threw at me. I'd started this thinking I was just defending a patch of dirt and petals. But what I was defending was her world, her right to grow up where beauty wasn't a threat, where rules didn't shrink you into silence, where women, mothers, could stand their ground and change the soil under their feet. Neighbors kept thanking me, but the truth is, they changed. They showed up. They got angry. They linked arms. They told their stories. I didn't lead a revolution. I just planted the first seed. They watered it. The story didn't stop at Maplewood. Within weeks, our little rebellion became a ripple. The local news segment got syndicated, then picked up by a national housing podcast, then by a viral Instagram account with millions of followers. Suddenly, I was getting messages from all over the country. People started calling me the Flower Lady. At first, I cringed. Then I realized, hell yes, I'm the Flower Lady. So I wrote a guide. How to declaw your HOA without losing your mind or your marigolds. Free download. No email list. Just the truth. Within a month, it had been shared over 100,000 times. A nonprofit reached out asking if I'd consult on a national campaign for HOA reform. I said yes. And every time I felt imposter syndrome creep in, I reminded myself, all this started because I said no to a woman who hated petunias. I look around now, and Maplewood is unrecognizable. Kids decorate sidewalks without fear. Porches bloom with wild expression. Neighbors wave instead of whispering. And the community bulletin board? It reads like a celebration. We stopped being a place of rules and fines. We became a neighborhood again. As for Clarissa, last we heard, she moved out of state. Her house sold below asking. Nobody misses her. No one brings up her name anymore, except as a cautionary tale. I sometimes walk past her old place and wonder, how did she not see this coming? You can only hold power if people believe in it. Once we stopped believing, she was just a woman with a clipboard and a complex. And me, I'm still planting, still teaching my daughter how to care for things, how to resist when resistance is required, how to bloom louder. Because this isn't just a story about flowers. It's about ownership, not of property, but of space, of voice, of truth. And the next time someone tries to dim that light, tries to force silence in the name of order, they'll remember what happened in Maplewood. They'll remember the garden. They'll remember the Flower Lady. And they'll think twice.